Welcome to the overview video for Chapter 24, Vernacular Music in America. Your learning objectives are number 1, to list the different types of vernacular music popular in the 20th century and name some of the most prominent composers and performers active in these traditions. Number 2, to describe the contributions of African Americans to the development of American popular music. Number 3, to explain the differences between blues, New Orleans jazz style, and big band jazz. Identify some of the most significant composers, arrangers, and performers associated with each, and name significant works by them. And number 4, to describe music for films from the first sound pictures to World War II era films. The impact of prosperity and technology on music and the growing importance of the United States and especially African Americans are apparent in vernacular music. Much vernacular music of the 20th century has achieved a permanence rivaling that of classical music, including Sousa marches, African American spirituals, popular songs, Broadway shows, film scores, band pieces, piano rags, and jazz. Wind and brass bands maintained the mix of serious and popular music that had once been common in orchestra concerts as well. The earliest American bands were attached to military units, but in the 19th century, amateur local bands became common everywhere. The period between the Civil War and World War I was the heyday of professional bands, including the one founded by the most successful bandmaster, John Philip Sousa, from 1854 to 1932. The repertoire of 19th century bands consisted of marches, dances, arrangements of arias and songs, transcriptions of pieces by classical composers, and virtuosic display pieces. Sousa composed over 100 marches, including the Stars and Stripes Forever. Although African slaves came from many diverse ethnic groups, their music shared common elements such as call and response, improvisation, syncopation, layered rhythms, and bending pitches. The African American form of music with the greatest impact in the 19th century was the spiritual. By the end of the century, spirituals were simultaneously folk music, popular songs, and a source of melodic material for classical composers. The Fisk Jubilee Singers popularized spirituals in the 1870s through polished performances and concert tours on both sides of the Atlantic. Brass bands, black churches, and dance orchestras were among the main training grounds for African American musicians. Among the dances played by these ensembles, ragtime, featuring syncopated rhythms over a regular march-like bass, was popular from the 1890s through 1910 to 1920. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, ragtime encompassed piano music, ensemble music, songs, dances, and instrumental pieces called rags. The leading ragtime composer was Scott Joplin, 1867 to 1917, best known for his piano rags. A typical rag, such as Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag from 1899, uses march form in duple meter and presents a syncopated melody over a steady bass. The gulf grew wider between art songs, which had precisely notated parts and were meant to be appreciated as art, and popular songs, which were meant to entertain listeners and amateur performers. Popular songs were written on a variety of topics and were used for every possible cause. They depended on the interplay of novelty with convention, such as the standard form of verse and refrain. The refrain was sometimes scored in parts and became known as the chorus. The key to success was creating a catchphrase, sometimes referred to as the hook, that could be repeated and varied. Tin Pan Alley was the name for a district in New York City where, beginning in the 1880s, numerous publishers specializing in popular songs were located. Most Tin Pan Alley songs had one or more verses followed by a 32-measure chorus, where songwriters placed their catchiest rhythms and melodic ideas. Irving Berlin, 1888 to 1989, one of America's most prolific and best-loved popular songwriters, wrote sentimental and patriotic lyrics and tunes that captured the American spirit. Popular song was performed, published, sold, and heard more than any other genre of music. Many of the best-known popular songs came from stage shows, including revues and operettas. The musical, a type of stage show featuring songs and dance numbers, was established in London in the 1890s and found a home on Broadway in New York, where George M. Cohan, 1878 to 1942, set the pattern for the American musical with Little Johnny Jones from 1904. The 1920s were an especially rich time for American popular music. The most successful songwriters of the period were equally at home writing for Tin Pan Alley, musical theater, and movie musicals. Musicals were collaborations, and some were primarily vehicles for star entertainers, but there was increasing interest in plot-driven musicals with close connections between music and story. Showboat from 1927, with music by Jerome Kern, 1885 to 1945, and book and lyrics by Oscar Hammerstein II, is an integrated musical that brings together a number of traditions and musical styles that all serve dramatic ends. George Gershwin, 1898 to 1937, was both a composer of jazz-influenced classical music and a writer of popular songs and musicals. His song, I Got Rhythm, reflects the energy of jazz and the optimism of Broadway musicals, and its harmonic progression became a vehicle for jazz improvisation. Broadway musicals maintained their traditions after World War II, and those that were successful tended to become Hollywood films. Richard Rodgers, 1902 to 1979, and Oscar Hammerstein II, 1895 to 1960, produced some of Broadway's best-loved shows, beginning with Oklahoma in 1943. Leonard Bernstein, 1910 to 1990, was a conductor and classical composer, as well as a major presence on Broadway, best known for his musical West Side Story from 1957. New technologies in the late 1920s made it possible to synchronize recorded sound with film. There are two categories of music in film. Number one, music heard or performed by the characters in the film, called diegetic music or source music. And number two, background music, called non-diegetic music or underscoring. Movies often included musical numbers as interludes or for dramatic reasons. In the 1930s, Hollywood studios fostered film scores that were integrated into the dramatic action, guiding the viewer's emotional responses and giving depth to the events on screen. An important early example is the score for King Kong from 1933 by Max Steiner, 1888 to 1971, which used leitmotifs and was coordinated with the action on screen. African American music and musicians played an increasingly influential role in the 1920s as blues and jazz gained wide currency. Jazz became an emblem for social liberation. The blues was one of the most influential genres of the early 20th century America, and its music expressed the feelings suggested by the words through a variety of elements, including blue notes. In his productions, W.C. Handy, 1873 to 1958, standardized what is now called the 12-bar blues form, which is illustrated in Backwater Blues by Bessie Smith, 1894 to 1937. The years from 1910 to 1920 saw the early development of jazz. Jazz players extemporized arrangements that distinguished one performer or performance from another. Jazz style is marked by anticipated beats, swinging rhythms, and other features, as in the playing of Jelly Roll Morton. In the 1920s, jazz featured syncopated rhythm, novel vocal and instrumental sounds, and improvisations or music in improvisatory style. New Orleans jazz, the leading style just after World War I, centered on group variations of a given tune and was developed in New Orleans by musicians such as cornetist Joe King Oliver, 1885 to 1938, and trumpeter Louis Armstrong, 1901 to 1971. Oliver formed King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band in Chicago, joined by Armstrong, who also recorded with his own group. The recordings of these bands embody the New Orleans jazz style. The ensemble is divided into the front line of melody instruments and the rhythm section. After presenting a tune, the group repeats its harmonic progression in a series of choruses, each featuring different instruments. Armstrong's recording of Oliver's West End Blues illustrates both his virtuoso trumpet playing and his scat singing. By the 1930s, big bands were popular. Big bands were divided into three sections: brass, reed, and rhythm. Successful arrangers captured in notation the spontaneous spirit of improvised playing and produced a wide variety of effects. The typical big band also featured a vocalist. Swing was a popular dance craze in America, and the number of swing bands exploded in the 1930s. Duke Ellington, 1899 to 1974, was a leading composer of the Jazz Age and one of the most influential American composers. Born in Washington, D.C., Ellington studied piano from the age of 7. By 17, he had formed his own band, which he moved to New York in 1923. From 1927 to 1931, Ellington developed his individual style and began to gain national recognition at the Cotton Club in Harlem. His works and arrangements highlighted the individual sounds of his musicians. His band was known around the world through recordings and international tours. In the 1930s, Ellington's band spent most of their time touring, and Ellington seemed to reach the peak of his creative abilities in the early 1940s. Cottontail is a contrafact, a new tune composed over a harmonic progression borrowed from a particular song. In this case, the chorus of Gershwin's I Got Rhythm. Ellington believed that jazz could serve as art music as well as dance and entertainment music. For your 25-point quiz, I would know about the following. Know about music's role in the American Civil War. Know about John Philip Sousa. Know about what music was programmed in 19th century band concerts. Know about the training grounds of African American music. Know about the traits of African American music. Know about spirituals. Know who the Fisk Jubilee singers were. Know about ragtime. Know about ragtime composers. Know about the standard form of the refrain or chorus in popular song. Know about Tin Pan Alley. Know about Irving Berlin. Know about George M. Cohan. Know about the musical. Know about Thomas Edison and the phonograph. Know about the technological advantages of the LP. Know what diegetic music is. Know about 19th century opera's effect on classical Hollywood film scores. Know what a blue note is. Know about 12-bar blues. Know about New Orleans jazz style. Know about New Orleans jazz ensembles. Know about swing music. Know about Duke Ellington and his piece Cottontail. And that ought to do it. Good luck.